Hey, pushers. So today we're finally going to get the English to show up in what will become the United States in the New World and begin putting in some colonies. We've talked about the Spanish. The Spanish, for the most part, are gone. They've gone on to Central and South America because they find lots and lots of gold there. And the English are nowhere to be found. So let's say mid 1500s. This is New World. The Spanish are here, stomping around in Central America and South America. They do have some outposts in the extreme southwestern part of what will become the United States, but there's really not a lot of people there. 1534, the French, oui, oui, they show up they land in present day Canada. And what they're looking for is this mythical Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage is this belief over in Europe that there is a waterway going across this new land, the New World, connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. Most of Europe still is not real interested in doing much with the New World. They don't really know what's there. They do know what's in Asia. So they're looking for this waterway that will go from here to here. And there's this belief in Europe that somehow, some way, there is this water passage, a river that goes the entire breadth of this landmass connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, creating a quick waterway to Asia. So the French show up in 1534. They're looking for the French or for the New York Northwest Passage. They establish a fort here, Quebec, and then they move on down to Montreal, and they keep moving further southwest, looking for this Northwest Passage. By 1550, most of the Spanish have left what will become the United States. They're now in what will become Mexico and Guatemala and Central America, South and Central America. So by 1550, really the only Europeans in North America are a couple of French dudes stomping up and down the Mississippi River looking for beaver pelts and other fur game. They're fur trappers stomping up and down the Mississippi River there. And that's about it. To this point, England has showed very little interest in the New World. They say they've got enough land throughout the rest of the world. They've got enough land holdings, enough colonies throughout the world. They don't need to worry about this new world, right? Let the rest of the world, let the rest of Europe deal with that. That's for people that can't get places like India. So England has shown very little interest in the New World by the mid 1500s. However, things are not going well in England. England, during this time, is experiencing really severe growing pains. There is a population explosion that takes place, and they just don't have enough food to feed all the people. So there's a lot of hunger. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of civic unrest throughout England. Things are not going well in England. And then things are going to get worse. In 1534, Henry VIII, you remember this guy? Henry VIII wants to have a son, and he keeps having girls. And of course, it's the woman's fault that he's having girls, right? It's the woman's fault that they keep popping out daughters. And he wants to find a new wife in hopes of her having a son. And the Catholic Church at this time, all of Europe much of Europe is Catholic. We've gone through the Reformation, and some of Central Europe has become Protestant, some Protestant religions, the Lutherans, and so on. But England at this time is a Catholic nation. And so Henry VIII wants a new wife so he can have a girl or have a boy. He's had lots of girls. He wants to have a new wife finally have a boy. Well, the Catholic Church tells him, you're already married. You can't get divorced. It's against the Catholic Church rules to get married. So Henry VIII comes up with a pretty ingenious plan. He kills his wife. And then he goes, oh, holy cow, my wife is dead. I've got to get a new wife. And he gets a new wife, and she has girls, and so on and so forth. So this goes on for a period of time. And eventually the Catholic Church has had enough of Henry VIII. Henry VIII has had enough of the Catholic Church. And Henry VIII decides it would just be easier if he could divorce his wife instead of like killing him. So in 1534, Henry VIII breaks away from the Catholic Church and creates his own church, the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. And basically what this is the Catholic Church light. It's a diet Catholic Church. It is in every way possible like the Catholic Church, except it doesn't have a pope. Well, the Catholic Church is not happy about Henry VIII creating his own church so he can get divorced and find a new wife. So the Catholic Church excommunicates all of England. Now, this is serious stuff in 1534, right? If you're excommunicated by the Pope, it means basically the Pope has told God not to let you into heaven. And so he's told all of England, most of whom are Catholic still in 1534, that they are forever banned from heaven because of their king, Henry VIII. This is very distressing to a lot of English people, right? To find out that all of a sudden, here they've been trying to be good Catholics, and now the Pope said they can't get into heaven. There are some people who like the idea of the Anglican Church. They're hoping that the Anglican Church or this Church of England will be better than the Catholic Church. They like a lot of the teachings and a lot of the beliefs of the Catholic Church, but they find the Catholic Church very complicated. I'm a Catholic. If you're a Catholic, you know the Catholic Church is really complicated, right? There's popes and there's bishops and there's cardinals and there's monsignors and there's deacons and there's right and there's all these rituals and everything, right? I've been a Catholic my whole life. I go to Catholic Church. It's very confusing. So the hope of many English is that this Anglican Church will be the Catholic Church, but much simpler. In reality, that never really happens. The Anglican Church maintains all of the complexities of the Catholic Church. It just doesn't have a pope. So eventually, Henry VIII dies. And let's talk about the Puritans first before we get into that. The Puritans. These are people that eventually play a very large role in early America. Puritans are people who support the Anglican Church, but they want a simpler, less Catholic church. They want a very simple, very easy to understand, very easy to follow church with much of the belief systems of the Catholic Church without the complexities of the Catholic Church. So Puritans like the Anglican Church, but they want it to be simpler. They want a more purified Anglican Church. And so there all of a sudden there begins to be a lot of tension, religious tension in England between the Puritans, who like the Anglican Church, but they want a simpler church, between those who have broken away from the Catholic Church and are now proud Anglicans. They're not happy with the Puritans, who now want to even further reform this church, and then the Catholics. So there's this religious tension beginning to build in England. In the middle of all this, Henry VIII dies, 1578. In the middle of this religious tension and in the middle of this economic tension, in the middle of this social tension taking place and increasing throughout England, Henry VIII dies, and he's got no son. Woof. This is a big, big problem. There's no male heirs anywhere who are ready to take over as King of England. Well, the English government decides maybe we should go with a woman. So they make his daughter, Elizabeth I, the first queen. And they just hope and pray, hold their breath and cross their fingers. This will go okay because, with a woman in charge, but who knows what's going to happen. So Elizabeth I comes into power. Now, the big question for Elizabeth I, is she a Catholic or is she an Anglican? Elizabeth I is a very smart, very savvy, very politically wise woman. And Elizabeth I's answer is sure. She never answers the question. She never says if she's Catholic, and she never says if she's an Anglican. Now, she's inherited a lot of the other social and economic problems taking place in England. And so her very close advisor, and that's in quotes, close advisor, Sir Walter Raleigh, he tells the Queen perhaps a solution to many of the problems we have in England economically and socially is if we could establish some settlements in the New World. And so in 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh convinces Elizabeth I to explore this possibility and begin creating some settlements in the New World and see what's there, and maybe there's something that we can use and will make life better in England. And Elizabeth I agrees, and she sends Sir Walter Raleigh off to establish a settlement, an English settlement in the New World. Sir Walter Raleigh sails to the New World, and right in this area here, he claims this entire coastline for England. And he calls it the colony of Virginia. He names it. Now, here's the cool thing about being a monarch in England. You get things named after you. Whew, what's better than that? So Sir Walter Raleigh names this new English settlement in the New World Virginia in honor of Queen Elizabeth I, because the story goes, Queen Elizabeth I never gets married. So obviously, since she never gets married and she never has any kids of her own, it's obvious she is the Virgin Queen. And that's what Virginia means, is the territory, the land for the Virgin Queen, Virginia. Huh. Okay. And he establishes a settlement off of present-day North Carolina, right in here, called Roanoke. And he leaves, 100, 150 settlers in Roanoke to begin creating this English settlement and figure out what they can do to make things better for England. He goes back to England. Now, in the process of going back to England, there's a lot of civil unrest. There's a lot of social unrest. There's some wars that take place. And so his return back to Roanoke is delayed. He's coming back. The plan is he's going to go to England and get some supplies and bring them back to Roanoke. Well, his return is delayed because of these problems back in England. And in 1590, the governor of Roanoke comes back with supplies, and he finds the colony absolutely deserted. Not a soul in sight. And make it even more bizarre, there's no sign of any struggle. There's no sign of any bloodshed. There's no bodies around. Nothing seems to be out of order or out of place. It's just as if they had left and they had never come back. To this day, we still don't really know what happened. We just know there was a settlement there, and then it was gone. The only clue that we've ever found was in a tree not far from Roanoke, from the settlement. Carved in the tree was the word Croatan, Croatan, Croatan. We don't know what it means. Now, we've got a pretty good idea. We've got a theory, at least. The theory is that these settlers at Roanoke got very desperate. They couldn't find any food. They were starving. They were in really bad condition. And the local Indians there took pity on them and took them in to live with them. And the settlers went to live with the local Indians. And we think that carving in the tree was the English word for that tribe of Indians, Croatan, because shortly thereafter, there's reports of seeing small Indian children, Native American children, in the woods with fair hair and fair skin and lighter colored eyes, which would not be the norm of Native Americans at that time. So we think the settlers went to live with these Indians. But again, we don't know. And from that point on, England kind of loses interest in the New World. And nothing happens for a while. And then in 1602, Elizabeth dies, and her cousin, because Elizabeth, remember, she's the Virgin Queen, she has no kids, so her cousin James I becomes king. So King Jimmy, and Jimmy comes in, and he's got much of the same problems, social and political, economic problems. And so in 1606, a group of English noblemen come to him and propose to create a joint stock company called the Virginia Company. And the joint stock company would be very much like a company today that you could buy stock in, like Nike or Coca-Cola or Google. The idea is that investors would invest money into this company. This company would then send settlers over to Virginia and use this money from investors to establish a settlement and figure out some way to make money for the investors and the crown. And King Jimmy thinks this is a great idea, right? We've got this territory, we might as well use it. And the crown, James and his family, become the principal investors. They become the largest investors in the Virginia Company. And other fairly well-off noblemen in England put money into this program, into this company as well. And they send people out to settle in Virginia and find something to make money. This would be a great way for England to make money and get rid of some of the social problems that they have. A lot of homeless people and a lot of unemployment in England at this time. And here's the plan. To clear out the poor in the workhouses, and the poor in workhouses were exactly what they were. They were houses for the poor, and they were places for the homeless, and they would do work, mostly menial labor, putting the piece, what they called piecework, where they had put together articles of clothing and so on and so forth like that. To clear out these poor in workhouses, which cost a lot of money for the Crown of England because they're the ones paying for these, we could clear them out and send them off to Virginia as indentured servants. Okay? And indentured servants, here's what indentured servants were. The Virginia Company would recruit craftsmen and artisans, blacksmiths, silversmiths, carpenters, people who had desirable skills. We would recruit them to ship them off to Virginia to employ their skills. And they would bring indentured servants with them. And indentured servants basically would sign a contract stating that they were willing to go to Virginia for a new start, and they would live with these craftsmen and artisans and learn the trade. The craftsmen and artisans, in return, had essentially a live-in slave who would do whatever they needed them to do, and the craftsmen and artisans would teach them the trade. And in exchange for these slaves essentially living with them, the craftsmen and artisans would pay for the indentured servants to go to the New World with them and would take care of them. They would feed them and house them in the New World. So this was an agreement for both sides. Craftsmen and artisans would get an opportunity to go to the New World and see what's there, maybe get a new start in life, have the opportunity to get some cheap land, and in the process build and hopefully grow this colony. They would have a slave who would go with them, and in exchange for free labor from this slave, this indentured servant, they would teach them the trade and take care of them. The indentured servant gets a whole new lease on life. All of their debts are going to be forgiven. They will get out of England where they have no prospects of ever getting out of the life that they're in, and they get to go to the new world for a new start. Seems to work for everybody. So in 1607, Jamestown is founded by the Virginia Company. Again, when you're the king or you're the monarch, you get things named after you. Jamestown, named after King Jimmy. So Jamestown is first established. 70 of the first 108 settlers, there's 108 settlers who initially go and establish Jamestown. 70 of the 108 will die within the first year. In the winter of 1607, more settlers have arrived. 440 of the 550 settlers will die. Between 1619 and 1622, 3,000 of the first 3,600 settlers will die. This is known as the dying time. And here's why this happens. This joint stock company has one mission and one mission only. It is an economic pursuit. Their only job is to find a way to make money for the crown. And if they don't make money for the crown, the king gets upset. And when the king gets upset, bad things happen. So they get there to this whole new world, Virginia. They land in an environment they know nothing about. And their first order of business is to try to figure out a way to make money instead of figuring out a way to survive. And they make some makeshift shelters, but they've never experienced a winter, anything like the winters of Virginia, which are brutally cold and lots of snow and very, very damp. They've never experienced that before, and so a lot of them die. They don't know what they can eat around them. They don't know what they can grow that will survive. So they have a really tough time surviving because they're more focused on making money than they are surviving. And so their shelters are not adequate. They don't have enough food. They don't know what to eat. Eventually, they do begin building wooden structures for housing, but that becomes a problem because they're heated and they cook over fire. So they build these fireplaces. Well, initially, their fireplaces and their chimneys are made out of wood. Oh, well, it didn't work out too well. They burned. They burned down their houses early on. So eventually they got to the point where they made the fireplace and chimney out of stone. But it was just one bungling disaster after another. And they died and they died and they died and they died because they're looking for a way to make money. What are they looking for? Well, they show up in Virginia. Guess what everybody in Europe wants? Gold. So they stomp around in the woods of Virginia looking for gold. No gold in Virginia. Well, they die from malnutrition, exposure, and general stupidity because they're trying to make money. So they're looking for a way to make money. They're initially looking for gold. No gold in Virginia. So they think, well, maybe we can find some spices here, right? Because that's a big thing over in Asia. If we can get some spices for the food, because English food is pretty terrible. Well, there's no spices. Maybe we can find some silk. So they begin looking for silk in the woods. There's no silkworms. So everything that they've done to make money fails miserably. On top of them dying all the time. And the king is getting more and more unhappy. And when the king ain't happy, ain't nobody gonna be happy. So John Rolfe, who's now the leader of Jamestown, has the pressure of the world. The survival of Jamestown, the survival of the joint stock company, maybe the personal survival of the people involved in this company, all depend on him to figure out a way to make money. So John Rolfe is out walking in the woods one day, and it hits him. Hey, I think I know how I can make money. Maybe. The English have seen the Native Americans in the area, and they pull these weeds out of the ground that the English call the stinking weed. And it's a plant. It was a weed that grew wild all over around Jamestown. And the local natives would pull this weed and they would dry it in the sun. And then they would wrap it in leaves, light it on fire, and put it in their mouth. And the natives seemed to really like this. So John Rolfe thought, maybe this will work over in England. Maybe Europeans will like the stinking weed. So he begins to cut down some of the stinking weed and ship it back to England to see what they like. Well, the English love it, and Europe loves it. And tobacco catches on like wildfire across England and then Europe. And then Virginia, the Virginia Company, is saved by a weed. And the English colony is saved, and Jamestown now becomes a thriving settlement in the New World. And this sets up an economic system that England is going to use from this point forward with the colonies. And it's called mercantilism. And it's super, 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 super important you understand what mercantilism is. You have got to know this. Got to know this. Like, know it, hint, hint, winky, winky, really important. Mercantilism. The best way that I can describe what mercantilism is to think of a wagon wheel. And in the center of the wagon wheel, where the wagon wheel turns, revolves around, is the mother country, MC. In this case would be England. And then you have these spokes that go out to the end of the wheel. And at the end of these spokes would be the various colonies that England is going to settle. And what's going to happen is the colonies at the end of this spoke are going to send back to the mother country raw materials and taxes. So they're going to supply the mother country with things that the mother country wants and needs: money and raw materials, wood, tobacco, cotton, so on. They'll send that back to the mother country. The mother country will then take these raw materials and they'll process them and everything in their factories. And then they'll send it back to the colony. They'll send back finished goods, clothing, ships, things like that. They will send the finished good back to the colony, as well as provide protection for the colony from the French and other European enemies, as well as from the Native Americans in the area. So the colony exists for the benefit of the mother country, but the mother country is also benefiting the colony. Colony is sending back raw materials for the mother country to process and make into a final good, as well as sending back taxes that they're paying for the benefit and the pleasure of English protection and the availability of English goods. That's mercantilism. And that's how all of these colonies, that's the relationship all of these colonies are going to have with England. Eventually, we're going to get 13 of these colonies established for this reason, right? All of the colonies are going to exist for the benefit of the mother country, and the mother country in return is going to provide goods and protection for the colonies, and that's mercantilism. Super important. Okie dokie, Panthers. We're done with that. Make sure you have taken notes. If you've taken notes at home, make sure you take a picture of the notes and send them to me so I can give you credit for the notes today. Also, hold on to the notes, because Obviously, those are your study guides. If you have any questions or any problems, concerns, conundrums about any of this, make sure you let me know. And next time, we'll begin establishing more colonies beyond Virginia. Have a good day.